I came to the point where I realized I wasn't going to be allowed to participate in songwriting, not anything more than a side guy, which is fun, you know.
That was from an interview Jason Everman did with Music Life Radio in September of 2010. Jason Everman and Chad Channing knew each other long before Nirvana. They went to elementary school together. As a matter of fact, it was Chad who introduced Jason to Kurt and Chris.
Through being friends with Chad, that's how I met Kurt and Chris. I remember at one point hanging out with them, Kurt broached the idea of adding a second guitar player. I think mainly just to augment them live, not so much in the studio. And I was like, yeah, he gave me a demo tape. I went home, learned the songs. And Nirvana was interesting because at that time they didn't really rehearse. And I think that was just a function of Kurt and Chris lived in one town, Chad lived in another, and I lived in another, and it was just logistically complicated.
It's a real hassle to get up for this.
I live in the capital of Washington State, Olympia.
I live in Tacoma, Washington. Muscle cars and crack cocaine. He's a deer farmer.
Frolics naked in the grass with deer.
I do. I
feeds them berries.
There's like a ferry boat that connects me to the world of Seattle.
It was Jason who paid for Nirvana's first album to be produced. Bleach was made with Jason's money. Kurt, Chris, and Chad didn't have the cash to pay for the studio. Neither did their record label at the time, Sub Pop. More on that a bit later. So it was Jason who paid the bill and saved the day, even though he doesn't actually appear on Bleach. The total cost was $606.17.
At that point, I'd been working as a commercial fisherman in Alaska for several seasons and had some money in the bank and was asked to finance the record, and I said, sure.
In a few minutes, I'm going to share with you the rest of that Jason Everman interview. But first, I want to share with you a few minutes of my interview with Bruce Pavitt, the co-founder of Sub Pop, Nirvana's first record label, where he talks about Jason Everman and the financing situation for Bleach. Nirvana recorded Bleach at a studio called Reciprocal Recordings.
Kurt called me and said, we're about to go on Reciprocal and we need you guys to cover the bill. And I had the audacity, and this is actually very embarrassing, to say, could you front me the money? You know, okay, the record label's supposed to come up with the cash, but like, just, can you guys cover it? We'll hit you later. That's how broke we were. And he basically hung up on me. But this second guitarist, Jason Everman, who didn't really play on the record, wound up paying the bill. You know, they went into the studio and he wound up covering the bill. But I do remember Kurt asking me to come up with $600, and I didn't. You know what? And here's the trippy part of the story. Sub Pop never came up with that money, the $600. So when I said a $600 record that sells a couple million copies, I said that's a good investment. Well, the punchline to that story is we actually spent zero. So it was a zero investment and sold 2 million copies. So that might be the best, most profitable record in the history of the music business, if you look at it that way. We did, I will say this, that on the second edition of Bleach, a lot of people don't know this, the first edition had, the first 1,000 were white copies. The second edition were black, but we had a huge fold-out poster of Jason Everman. That was our way of saying, thanks for paying for the recording, bro.
Did you have any kind of working relationship with Jason Everman when he was in Nirvana?
Not really. He's pretty noted as kind of a serious guy, a little sullen. Definitely rocked, took things very seriously. I thought it was good, when Nirvana played the Moore Theater in Seattle with 1,500 people at the Sub Pop Showcase, the Lame Fest, June 9th of 1989. Jason Everman got on stage. And if you see any of the shows from that tour, you can really see it coming together. He definitely added a lot of punch to the band, but just didn't work out.
I'm going to show you more of that interview a bit later. Going back to Jason, here Jason talks about how he actually wanted to be a drummer growing up, but ended up playing guitar simply because it was too much money to buy a drum set. And also his parents didn't want someone drumming in the house.
Initially, I wanted to get a drum set and be a drummer. And I think in a lot of ways, I'm still kind of a frustrated drummer. But drum set was just too, as a bridge too far, man. It was too much money, and I don't think my parents would have ever tolerated me banging on drums after school. So I went to the guitar just because it was economically that was, what worked. I just started plinking around listening to my Kiss records, AC/DC, stuff like that, and trial and error, figuring out the guitar.
Shortly after leaving Nirvana, Jason joined Soundgarden as their bassist. He replaced their original bassist, Hiro Yamamoto, after he quit the band. Jason was in the band from about September of 1989 till approximately May or June of 1990.
Well, he was in this band, Nirvana.
Fire record.
They're an amazing Seattle band, and we were huge fans of theirs. And simultaneously, at the time that our bass player quit, he left Nirvana, so we asked him if he wanted to check it out. He was already a big fan. He learned all of our recorded songs in a few weeks, and when we chose him, all we had to do was just go play. It's really easy.
Unlike Nirvana, where we still don't know definitively if Jason quit or if he was fired, with Soundgarden, he was fired. Jason said the following in 2023 about being fired from Soundgarden. Quote, "It's complicated, but at the end of the day, I wasn't getting along with Chris Cornell that well, and obviously who's gonna go? It was me. It broke my heart. Getting fired from Soundgarden put me in a pretty bad tailspin. It was a pretty rough patch in my life for sure, because I loved that band. I never thought they would get as big as they did. Honestly, it was surprising, because they were a great band, but I always thought they were a little too quirky to be huge, despite the Chris Cornell factor. I always thought they were a little too weird to have mainstream success, which was fine with me. I thought they'd be a big indie band like Sonic Youth." End quote. Now, really interestingly, according to Kurt Cobain's longtime girlfriend, Tracy Miranda, after Jason Everman was fired as the bassist in Soundgarden, Kurt was interested in possibly auditioning to be the bass player in Soundgarden. This is from Greg Prado's book, Grunge is Dead. Quote, "Kurt loved Soundgarden. At one point, when they were looking for another bassist, I think maybe when Ben Shepherd joined the band, Kurt actually thought about quitting Nirvana. He wanted to try out for Soundgarden because he liked them that much." End quote. Now, imagine how interesting it would have been if not only Kurt had joined Soundgarden as their bassist, but also if he had joined right after Soundgarden parted ways with Jason Everman. I mean, depending on how you look at it, Jason is either one of the luckiest or unluckiest people in the history of the grunge scene. Here he is discussing his relationship with Chad Channing and how him and Chad were actually in a band together before Nirvana.
I've known Chad since 6th grade. He was in my homeroom in 6th grade. Chad was exotic and cool because in 6th grade he had long hair and a mustache. I don't think I played in a formal band until maybe 85, like my junior year of high school, with actually Chad Channing. And we had this band called Stone Crow. It was fun. That was like the first band, like actually loaded up the band and went to Seattle and supported like national punk bands on tour and stuff. So that was kind of my first exposure to playing live.
It sounds like your friendship with Chad Channing was the reason that you were able to get into Nirvana.
Yeah, that was definitely it. Well, I remember seeing Nirvana, and they were called Skid Row. I think they went through a couple different name permutations, but I think the first time I saw them was at the Community World Theater in Tacoma, like in 88 maybe. And the reason I got interested is because a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you need to check out Dale Crover's new band." Because at the time, Dale was playing drums with Kurt and Chris. I don't know at what point Chad ended up in the band or what the mechanism was for that. The first time I played with them live was a dorm party at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, this dorm called K-Dorm.
Can you describe your time with Nirvana, the types of gigs that you would play with them?
Did like a West Coast tour and then the first U.S. tour. The first U.S. tour was, it's the classic indie rock van tour. Load up all the gear, get in the van, play to spotty shows in the smaller towns and maybe bigger turnouts in the bigger towns. But playing a show and then afterwards, you have enough money to buy gas in the next town or buy something to eat. What do you do?
In terms of early Nirvana tour stories, during the last 40 minutes or so of this video, I'm going to share with you quotes from Chad Channing, where he reflects on touring with Nirvana, his history with the band, and much more.
So what was like the first songs you guys ever jammed on?
Floyd the Barber, Spank Through. We had a song called Ranchola. It was really weird.
We had a song called Aero Zeppelin.
We had a song called Aero Zeppelin. We did.
We were more punk rock at least on that one. Kind of like scratch acid rip-offs. I was into hard rock before I was into punk rock, like the Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith and stuff like that, or Motorhead.
Jason Everman was a hard rock heavy metal guy, so it's interesting to hear Kurt talk about how he was really into those kind of bands before he got into punk. Perhaps if Kurt's musical taste had remained more on the heavy metal hard rock side, Jason would have remained in Nirvana. To this day, it's not 100% clear whether Jason quit the band or whether he was fired. Different sources say different things. For Kurt's part, he said in this interview with journalist Mike Hibarger that it was them who removed Jason.
During the week that we kicked him out, he tried out for Soundgarden. It worked out. It was awesome.
For his part, Jason said that he left the band. He actually said he felt relieved when things ended with Nirvana.
I mean, I honestly just felt kind of relieved. It was getting stressful towards the end.
In any case, the following is a quote from Kurt where he discusses Jason and Nirvana parting ways. I believe this quote is from 1990. Quote, "It was very mutual. I don't really want to elaborate on it. It was just musical differences. We're really glad it worked out the way it did. He really did keep the band together. It gave me more freedom to jump around into the crowd in the middle of the solo, stuff like that. Get a little bit more wild. I'm becoming a lot more comfortable playing by myself, so we really don't need another guitarist. It's very rare to get people as really compatible as we are, the three of us." Jason Everman didn't actually play on Bleach. He was a good friend who contributed money to pay for the recording of Bleach. In return, we credited him as a guitarist and put him in the picture in the album. Nirvana has always been a three-piece band, even on Bleach. Chad Channing just wanted to leave, although I'm not sure why. But we're still friends, even though we don't keep in touch very often these days. When Chad left, we looked for a drummer and found Dave Grohl, who I think is the best drummer I could ever find. He was playing in a hardcore band called Scream, and he's simply the best, the most incredible drummer I've ever seen. As per Jason, we met Jason maybe a couple of months before we recorded Bleach and really liked him and started hanging out with him. So I started thinking that maybe I like to do a bit more singing and didn't want to worry about guitar playing that much. End quote. It's interesting to hear Kurt say that Chad left the band and he's not sure why, when in reality, Kurt has said at least a few times publicly that Chad was fired from the band. Though in any case, very similar to the Jason situation, Chad departing ways with Nirvana was very much a mutual thing. Just like Jason, Chad was not happy that he wasn't able to contribute songwriting-wise towards Nirvana. Added to the mix, Kurt felt Chad's drumming style wasn't the best for Nirvana anymore, and it was one of those things where both sides just felt like this was the end of the road. I'll be exploring what happened between Nirvana and Chad in much more detail later on in this video. But first, I want to show you something I think is kind of cool. At Nirvana's concert on October 30th, 1993, about half a year before Kurt died, Kurt thought he saw Chad in the crowd. This concert took place at the Hara Arena near Daytona, Ohio, which is on the other side of the country from Seattle, from Bainbridge Island, so it was already unlikely Chad would be there in the first place. Eventually, it turned out he wasn't there, but Kurt thought he was. And so, in front of a crowd of thousands of fans, Kurt gave Chad a pretty cool shout-out.
Chad, where the hell are you? We really want you to come up here. So, try to make it over. I don't know where they wanted you to come, on this side or that side, I don't remember, but try to come over, okay? We're not playing until you come up here. Hey Chad, now we're really sorry if we freaked you out or embarrassed you or anything. We'd really like you to come backstage and say hi to us after the show. But we'd really like you to play a song. We'd like you to play School with us if you could.
In a few minutes, I'm going to get back to the Jason Everman story. But first, as you heard Kurt say, School appears on Nirvana's first album, Bleach. That album was produced by Jack Endino. And Nirvana's next album, Nevermind, was produced by Butch Vig. However, were it not for a scheduling issue, Jack Endino may have produced Nevermind. Nevermind was recorded from May to June of 1991, but a year earlier, from April 2nd to 6th of 1990, Nirvana recorded 8 songs with Butch Vig. That was the first time they worked with him. Interestingly, as you'll hear in a minute from Kurt himself, the only reason they didn't work with Jack Endino for this April session is because Jack was busy. Now, the reason this ties into Nevermind is because 5 of the 8 songs they recorded in April of 1990 were re-recorded for Nevermind. Those 5 songs are Breed, In Bloom, Stay Away, Lithium, and Polly. And so if Jack had done the original April 1990 versions of those songs, there's a much higher chance that he would have been hired to work on Nevermind. For those of you who are curious, the other 3 songs from the April 1990 session were Dive, Sappy, and Here She Comes Now. This session, the April 1990 session, was supposed to produce the final recordings that were to appear on Nirvana's next album. They weren't supposed to be re-recorded a year later for Nevermind. Here's what happened. In 1988, Nirvana signed with Sub Pop, an independent record label based in Seattle. Sub Pop did not have the commercial outreach that the major record labels have. Sub Pop was supposed to release the April of 1990 sessions as the next Nirvana album. But what Kurt and Chris did without Sub Pop knowing is they sent those April of 1990 sessions to various major labels in order to generate interest in signing Nirvana to a major label contract. And that's exactly what happened. In late 1990, Nirvana left Sub Pop and signed with the major label DGC, the David Geffen Company. In this clip I'm going to show you, when Kurt talks about the new Nirvana record, he's referring to the April of 1990 session.
The next record is recorded, or?
Some of it, about 7 songs. We did it with Butch Vig.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How did that work out?
Thumbs up. It really worked out well.
Oh, yeah? In Madison?
Yeah.
You recorded it with Butch, and you were going to record like 3 more songs back in Seattle?
Yeah. When we write them, we don't have that.
When you record with Jack and Dino, what's that like?
It's a constant battle. He beats the shit out of us. Yeah. He's a real fucker. He's a great guy. Beautiful person.
Lays it out.
What does he do for your sound?
No, it's a secret. He wanted to tell us. He just
he
works well. We don't know.
One thing I noticed about the last record is it could have all sounded like really samey, but it doesn't.
Really what?
Similar? Yeah. Well, see, some of the songs, 2 or 3 songs were recorded with Dale Crover of the Melvins. So those were different sessions. Those were about a year earlier than that.
Love Buzz was at a different session.
Yeah, Love Buzz was a different session.
Big Cheese.
So he sort of had a small idea what we were looking for, I suppose.
What direction are you headed? More records with Sub Pop?
Yeah, well, we signed a contract for 3 records. So we've got 2 more. But we could always change our name, go to a major.
In about 10 minutes, I'm going to share with you audio of Kurt discussing the contract they signed with DGC, the David Geffen Company. And I'm also going to go over more of Jason Everman's history with Nirvana. But first, here's the crazy backstory as to how Nirvana left Sub Pop for DGC. A very drunk, very angry Chris Novoselic actually saved Sub Pop from going bankrupt. When Nirvana left Sub Pop in 1990, Bruce and Jonathan were devastated. Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman are the 2 co-founders of Sub Pop. However, as Bruce said to me in this interview clip I'm going to share with you, Nirvana leaving Sub Pop actually saved the record label from going bankrupt. Nevermind was released by DGC on September 24th of 91. In August of 91, Sub Pop had only $100 left in their bank account. But when Nevermind exploded, Sub Pop got millions of dollars in royalties. The crazy thing is, they only got those royalties because of a contract a very angry Chris Novoselic forced Sub Pop to sign back in 1989. Bruce explains the whole story here.
What was the, legal process like getting Nirvana off of Sub Pop and onto DGC?
Well, what happened was, I'll give you the story. In 89, the summer of 89, a few months after Bleach had been out, Chris Novoselic came to my house and in a fairly aggressive way insisted we sign them to an actual contract. Okay, which saved our ass in the end, right? It was a total miracle because I was not at my house. I was next door at a party. And I thought, I'm going to step on the porch and get some fresh air. And I stepped on the porch to get some fresh air. And I saw Chris walking towards the house. And I'm like, what's up? And, just to color the situation, he'd been drinking. So it was a scary moment where he was like we're getting a contract, and we went upstairs and we talked and I was trying to chill him out. So it was a miracle that we even crossed paths, because if I hadn't stepped out for that fresh air, he would have came to my house, probably would have got home, sobered up, and whether we would get a contract or not, I don't know if that ever happened. At that time in the 80s, typically indie labels didn't work with contracts. They didn't have money for attorneys, right? So it was always a handshake deal. So we had no money for an attorney, so I called Poneman. He went to the library, he Xeroxed or photocopied a boilerplate contract, filled in Nirvana, cost us 10 cents, right? They come in, they sign it, and because we had that contract, when Nirvana decided to jump to a major label using the recording of their second album that we thought we were going to release, but what we didn't know is that they were sending that out as a demo to major labels. DGC stepped in and said, we're taking these guys, just going to have to deal with it, but we'll negotiate, a settlement. So it was kind of a bittersweet moment, but because they were signed to 2 more records, we got royalties from In Utero and Nevermind, so that really totally saved our ass. There's money coming into the label. We're signing new acts, like literally millions of dollars are pouring in, whereas, like I said, we had less than $100 in August of 91. That all changed within 6 months. We're rehiring, we're re-signing. Bleach is going through the roof. We sell 1 million copies of Bleach. Again, millions of dollars are coming in. So that was all exciting. And then for us, the mania that happened in Seattle, you'd have camera crews coming in from Spain. And of course, we had an office, so they could always get an interview with us. And I remember doing like an interview a day for at least a year because the Seattle grunge thing was blowing up. So it was ridiculous. It was exciting. It was a little weird, but ultimately it was an amazing, amazing time.
At the end of this clip, Bruce talks about a conversation he had with Kurt on January 11th of 92. That was the day Nevermind topped Michael Jackson's album Dangerous as the #1 album in America on the US Billboard charts. That same day, Nirvana played on Saturday Night Live. This was when Nirvana mania was really hitting its peak, and Bruce discusses what Kurt's emotional state was like on that day, and in general how he was feeling about the newfound fame he had. But first, Bruce shares the pretty funny story of how he was kind of in denial about Nirvana leaving Sub Pop.
I was really pretty oblivious. It's my understanding Kurt made up his mind, but still, in my mind, I literally couldn't imagine them doing that, even though I went through this whole process. John's like, I think major labels are looking at them. I was literally just still interpreting that as like, those are just rumors. And I think he was way more savvy on that than I was. And in fact, that summer, he had me go visit them in Las Vegas when they were touring with Sonic Youth. And I go to Las Vegas, and in the dressing room, there's a couple of guys from DGC. And it's a little strange, but I'm like, oh, the DGC guys are here, and we're chit-chatting. And, in retrospect, it's just totally obvious what was going on. But I think I just didn't think they would actually do it, that they would stay indie because they were very punk in spirit. And at that time, very few bands did that. So it was almost inconceivable to me that they would actually do that. John said, visit Kurt and tell him he's got to stick with Sub Pop, convince him to stay with the label. And I did. I brought him some records of outsider artists like Daniel Johnston. Hi, how are you? I gave him that album. You later see him wearing that T-shirt everywhere. Well, yeah. that was a gift, and it was my way of saying we are always going to support the outsiders. Corporations are not going to do that, so we are going to respect your creativity and support Nirvana. But he also knew we were pretty broke at the time.
So when did you first realize that Nirvana was in fact going to leave the label?
Well, I will tell you, they did a show in September at this garage. It's kind of an infamous show. I'm trying to remember the name of this garage.
The Motorsports?
Motorsports garage. Thank you. The Motorsports show was kind of their last indie Sub Pop related show. And unbeknownst to Danny Peters, who was drumming with them, they had already decided that they were going to bring in Dave Grohl. I didn't know anything about the girl situation. Sub Pop had just put out a single, Sliver and Dive by Nirvana. And Nirvana just kept telling us, hey, we need some time before we put out the album. So here's a single. So that's what they're telling me, right? And I'm just taking that at face value. So it was right after that show, somebody basically said, we're seeing Nirvana riding around in limos. You know that, right? Everybody's courting them. And I'm still like, no, it's not happening. It was just like this weird psychological thing. And finally somebody said, dude, they signed to DGC. And I think I kind of snapped. I remember being just profoundly sad, like that it sunk in that, yes, this is happening. It's kind of like you hear maybe your girlfriend's cheating on you and you're like, no, that wouldn't happen. And then next thing you know, you don't have a girlfriend anymore. It's a little bit like that, and the mind does funny things when it doesn't want to deal with reality.
But then, obviously it has that Cinderella ending when they blew up and it kind of, saved the label. Right?
It does. So it really worked for everybody in a way. But see, there's just so many layers to the story. And this is where I'm going to get a little sad here with Kurt. He's no longer with us, So there's so many different ways of looking at the story. But ultimately, it's safe to say that they had a tremendous cultural impact. I will say that the last time I really had a good conversation with Kurt was at a key point in their career, was after their set that they played Saturday Night Live. They played Saturday Night Live like the second Saturday in January. Their record had just knocked Michael Jackson off the #1 spot. It was kind of the peak of the explosion. They play Saturday Night Live. So they're selling 400,000 records a week. And I went backstage after the show and I got to hang out with Kurt. And it was just him and me talking. And he was really glad to see me. And you could tell that he was just in an ecstatic state that they were achieving so much success. And he told me how much he wanted to open a petting zoo for children. And, he had all these fantasies and stuff he was going to do with his cash. And, he goes, kids are asking me for my autograph. And even though supposedly Nirvana didn't do autographs, that was kind of a thing you would hear. He specifically told me that he was honored. He was enjoying being a rock star. He was straight up. He was like, kids are asking me for autographs. It's cool. It was good. He was in a really good place.